welcome back to another episode of the Young Professionals podcast. Sarge and Luke here again. Sarge, who are we speaking with today?
Luke, today we're speaking with Georgia Whiteside. Georgia is an associate lawyer at Johnson Winter Slattery, working predominantly in the tax and corporate team. After graduating from Deakin with an art law degree at the start of 2017, Georgia completed the graduate program at JWS, after which she took a 12-month leave of absence to complete an associateship with Justice Steward in the Federal Court of Australia. Georgia then returned to JWS, where she went on to complete a 10-month secondment to CUV to work on the takeover by Asahi. Georgia has been involved in nearly all aspects of the legal landscape, so it is great to speak with her today. Georgia, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for being here. We'll jump straight into it. What does an associate or what does a lawyer do at a law firm, and what does your day-to-day look like?
So I'm working in the tax team at my law firm most of the time, although I do some work in the other teams. But at the moment, I'm working on a big business audit. So I'm a second year lawyer. So at the moment, we've got a big document review going on. So I've got 6 junior lawyers reviewing documents for me. And then I'm doing second level review of those documents. And then other tasks, we're always doing lots of continued professional development. So working on presentations and contributing to textbooks and things like that. And otherwise just dealing with lots of little matters as they come up. So there's always lots of emails and meetings and helping to draft legal documents.
And working in a tax team, what does that look like? What are the types of issues that you might come across? Yeah,
I know it sounds really boring. It's like such a easy way to end a conversation at a party. No one wants to talk about tax law, but I really enjoy it. So tax teams are usually split into the front end work, so transactions and advisory, and the tax team will advise on mergers and acquisitions and other corporate transactions and structures. Sometimes they'll just have a small involvement and they'll have a look over an agreement and make sure it looks okay from a tax perspective, because there are some tricky things with tax and you want some greater expertise. And then on the disputes side, my firm does work for big multinationals that the tax office wants to make sure that they're doing the right thing and paying their fair share. So often large multinationals will receive letters from the ATO asking more about their affairs, and they'll ask for documents and information. And then that can be quite a long and time-consuming process in dealing with the ATO as they audit your affairs.
And maybe a bit of a silly question. What's the source of all these different rules that a tax professional needs to be across?
We've got lots of big textbooks of legislation because there are lots of different acts that cover tax. So there's the federal taxes, the income tax legislation that I prefer to deal with. There's 2 acts which we use for that. It's quite complicated legislation, and they tried to rewrite it. They first wrote it in 1936, and then they tried to simplify the tax laws in 1997, but they didn't quite get to cover everything, and it didn't quite work too well for them. So now we've got 2 income tax acts. And then we also deal with indirect taxes as well, which is like stamp duty and GST. So then there's a whole nother sets of laws to deal with those topics.
George, for the people that aren't studying law or looking to get into the legal industry, can you just touch on what an act is and what legislation is and why that's important in terms of how you operate as a lawyer and all of these compliance issues that the companies are coming to you with?
Yeah, sure. So acts are the laws passed by Parliament. So there's federal laws which come from the federal Parliament. And they govern federal things, and they set out the rules for your tax affairs as well as everything else in different areas of law. And then there's also the rules created by state parliaments that deal with state issues.
And it's basically the rule book that people have to play by.
Yeah, the rule book.
Yeah, depending on what you're doing and what you're interested in.
Yeah, exactly. And it's that the law is really, the legislation is really just the starting point. And then that gets built on by case law, so law made from courts and judges. And then there's also lots of other extrinsic material that we look at, as well as regulations and other things to supplement. So the rule book is where you start with the legislation, and then there's lots that piles on top of that to help you understand what Parliament is intending to achieve.
Yeah, and I think that extrinsic information that you're talking about in terms of you obviously deal with the ATO or the tax office a lot of the time, and they'll come out with decisions that or guidance notes and things like that that people can look to. So for people starting out at law school or in their first year of law or second year of law, like you might find the legislation a bit confusing, but there's a whole other world of stuff out there once you get into practice.
Definitely.
I think what you said in terms of it can be a conversation stopper at a party, what you talk about in terms of tax law. A question that I always get in terms of like what you do day to day is it like Suits? Is that what you do all day? So why don't you take us through what say a contract review is? And I know that that's something that a lot of say corporate lawyers are involved in a lot of the time. What is the detail of the deals that you're working on, and what are you actually doing for the client?
Yeah, so when I'm looking at laws for the corporate team or from a corporate perspective, I'll basically be looking at the whole document and making sure that it's logical and it makes sense, but then also looking for any red flags or just things. Often they're things that you might not be able to change, but they're just going to be things that you want to advise the client about. So you really want the client to be able to understand the risk profile of the agreement that they're entering into. So even if there's things you can't change, it's important to highlight what's going to happen if something goes wrong under the agreement. And then usually there'll be some sticking points for the client and things that you'll have to change. So yeah, looking at all of that from a corporate perspective, and then tax as well. There can be some really expensive issues down the track if you haven't worked out how the two parties or whoever's party to the agreement are going to deal with their liability under the agreement in respect of tax issues, and also in respect of tax issues that might arise further down the track that you can't foresee at the time of entering into the agreement.
And how do you stay across all of these different changing laws and all the different guidance that's published by the ATO?
So I think that no one in the team expects me to know everything as a junior lawyer, and I think that's the case for most firms and most junior lawyers. So usually you've got some time to look into things when you're working on a new matter, making sure you're across the latest law on that. But also we do in my team, we have fortnightly training where we'll look at a new tax case and someone will present on that. So that's a good way to stay across developments, as well as just, my email subscriptions that I sign up to, giving me notifications of taxpayer alerts and things like that. And also just talking to people in the team, talking to the people in the industry outside of my law firm, and just staying across the key cases as well. Like, for example, last week there was a big transfer pricing decision being heard in the full court of the federal court. So I just tuned into that in the background while I was working for 4 days. And that's another good thing, especially it's very easy with COVID at the moment. So court cases are all open to the public. And with COVID, because they're hearing them online at the moment, anyone from the public can tune in to most cases at any time. So you can they publish the dial-in details online, and you can tune in to just have a listen to what's happening in these court cases, which can also be a good way to just understand how court cases work in general.
I think that's a good point, even for uni students or anyone even studying legal studies at high school. I know people were saying, try and get along to a court case if you can during uni, and it was always a bit of a pain to try and get there. But it's never been more accessible than it is today. So certainly try and log on there. Georgia, I want to try and touch on, and you've got a really colourful history in terms of touching on every aspect of the legal industry basically so far. I think a point of interest for a lot of people listening that might be studying law is obviously the clerkship process and how you go through, say, clerkships and then grad roles and get into a junior position at a firm. Do you want to step through that process and at what stage you started to think about that and kind of what steps you took to prepare for it?
Yeah, sure. So I was, from the start of my degree, I was always thinking about making connections to make it easier to get a job when I finished my degree. Because I wasn't always the best at putting all my eggs in the uni basket and focusing just on grades. So I tried to take to always be thinking from the start about ways I could learn more about how to get into the industry. So at the end of my first year of my degree, I did some legal work at a big ASX company just for 8 weeks. And then I think in my second year of university, I started working for 2 barristers in the city as an assistant. So that was a really good way to just find out what's going on in the legal industry, get to know some people and find out more about how it all works. So I was there for 18 months and then I applied for clerkships in the usual way, just looking at the different firms and what they offer online and going through that application process. I didn't really know much about it, so I relied a lot on the websites that post the lists of all the different clerkships and how they work, how the applications work. And then I clerked at 3 law firms and I ended up staying at Thompson Gear for 10 months after my clerkship in the banking team. And then I swapped over to my current firm once offers for grad years came out.
Oh, nice. And I think, a lot of us are kind of prone to underselling ourselves. And I think you've done it just there, like landing 3 clerkships in quite a competitive environment, which is kind of the legal industry. Trying to get into it is no mean feat. Do you want to talk about the process in terms of the cover letters and getting in touch with people and understanding how important it is to figure out what different firms are after and what to kind of appeal to in that process, and even talk to, say, the interview process and what that was like and how you kind of prepared for that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it can be really difficult and you never know what different law firms are looking for. So part of it is definitely a numbers game. I think it's good to just apply to a broad range of law firms because you might think, I'm not good enough to get into this top law firm, but you might end up getting an interview there and not getting an interview at one that you thought would be easier to get. I don't really think that you can work out what jobs are going to be easier to get compared to others. So I think it's good to just apply for lots of firms, apply for a really broad range, and then try and showcase whatever you can in your resume and cover letter. But I always like to keep my cover letter pretty short because I always think that I try and keep it to like around a page because I always think that there will be lots of applicants and lots of reading for HR to do. And then I think I thought the clerkship process seemed really rigid when I was first introduced to it, but then having worked in law firms and things, and I've started to see that there's lots of, different side entrances and different ways to go about these things. So I don't think you should think that, if you miss out on a clerkship, that there's no way then to get that legal experience at a law firm. So you should always just try and be keeping your ear out for other ways to get some experience. And you don't have to go through the same way that everyone else does.
Just on that cover letter point and keeping it nice and short, I think the cover letter is also a really good way to demonstrate to your employer that you can write. And a big part of being a lawyer is being able to write and communicate concisely and succinctly. So I think that's a great opportunity to showcase yourself when applying for the clerkships. Yeah.
Maybe a cover letter is more important in the legal industry compared to some other ones, and you can really focus on getting the tone right so that they can kind of get a feel for who you are from your writing.
Georgia, you also have you completed your associateship with Justice Steward in the Federal Court of Australia. How did you go about securing that, and what types of things were you doing?
That came about with a bit of luck, but I think you have more luck the more you've kind of gone out and gotten different work experiences. Because I found out about that job because I had worked for those barristers, and they were on the same floor of chambers as Justice Steward.
And what's chambers?
Oh, sorry. So barristers are running their own business. So barristers being the people who appear in court. So a law firm often will hire a barrister to talk on behalf of their client in court. So each barrister is running their own business, and they will rent out a room to run that business from. And those rooms are called chambers. And I got in trouble a lot when I was starting out in chambers for calling them offices. The barristers definitely didn't like it if I ever called it an office. I had to call them rooms in chambers. And then they use the same word for the rooms that the judges occupy in courts. So you'll have chambers where barristers rent out rooms, and then each court has chambers where the judges have rooms.
Yeah.
So back to your question about the associateship. So I knew Justice Steward from working in chambers, because you get to know a lot of barristers when you're in there. And then he was appointed to the federal court, which was another stroke of luck, because often they plan their associates quite far in advance. But obviously you can't plan your associate when you don't even know that you're going to be in the court. So he just was appointed, and he was looking for his first associate. And one of his previous assistants reached out to me and asked if I'd like to apply. And so I applied that way, which was great, because I probably wouldn't have thought to have done an associateship otherwise. So,
and what sorts of things were you doing with Justice Stewart while you were an associate?
It was such a fun year. And so it was just, because it was his first year in the court, he was kind of trying to work out how it all worked, and I was trying to work out how it all worked. Unfortunately, he had a assistant as well who'd been at the court for a long time, so she could kind of show us the ropes. But so I was working with him in chambers, and then so he'll sit in his room in chambers for most of the day, and then when he's got a court case on, he'll go down to court, and I'll go ahead of him and set up his desk and his computer and things, and then I'll take the appearances from the barristers who are appearing. So I'll get their names and I'll write them down for him. And then when court's ready to commence, I would knock the door, and everyone stands up, and we'd walk in, and I'd call the matter for hearing. And then during the hearing, actually, I often was working on other things, because it took up a lot of my time, and I needed to stay on top of my work. So in terms of what work I did for him, apart from setting up court, it was a lot of research, particularly as it was his first year, and he was a tax barrister, but then going into court, he was hearing matters from all sorts of practice areas. So he had to relearn lots of different areas of law. And so I would help him do research on legal issues that were arising in the cases in his docket. And then a big part of the job of an associate is also helping with judgments, and especially proofreading judgments and making sure that everything's correct before the judgment gets handed down.
On that, George, obviously people that are at law school will be used to reading judgments and know what they are. But do you want to just run through what, I guess, and this is super basic, but for people who aren't, say, at law school, they probably wouldn't know, what is case law, and how are those judgments that you are proofing for your judge, how are they used in practice, and why are they important?
Yeah, definitely. So when we would hear matters in front of us, the first point would be the legislation, which we discussed earlier. So we'd be looking at the law, but the law doesn't show you how the rules would apply to all different circumstances. So in order to fill those gaps, you have to look at how the law has been interpreted interpreted by courts in similar cases that have come before. So that's called precedent. And some precedent you have to follow. It's called binding precedent. Whereas other precedent you just look at as an example of how people have thought about these issues, and that is called persuasive precedent. So we'd start with the law, and then the different parties would also show us similar cases or cases that talk about the types of issues that tell us how to interpret the law. And if there was binding precedent, we'd have to follow it. The judge has to follow it. And then so you hear the case from both parties, and then you go away and have a think about it. Sometimes they deliver the judgment on the spot, but usually you go away and have a think about it. And then you write down the reasons for why you've come to the decision that you've come to. So the cases are setting out the reasoning as to what the law means and how it applies to these facts and circumstances, so that we can understand. Yeah.
What drives whether something's binding and whether something's persuasive?
So the courts sit in a hierarchy, and that means that the courts at the top of the hierarchy have the most. Their cases are binding on the courts beneath them. So the courts. And that helps us to have some certainty and in the law, so we can look at what's happened in the courts above, and we have to follow that. Whereas if it's happened in a court that's lower in the hierarchy, the higher courts have the power to deviate from that.
And I think an important point to note is say you're working for a judge, you would have had obviously direct exposure to this, but I think people that aren't in the industry might think, judges just spend all their time thinking and taking all of their time. But an important point is that, when they make a decision, then it becomes precedent. So they need to make sure that what they're deciding is kind of based on some decent logic. So can you talk to how your judge, particularly as a first year judge, was that a lot of responsibility that he was like, I really need to get this right, obviously? And how did he kind of lean on you to help him with that?
Yeah, definitely. He really liked to be prepared, and I felt that some of the more experienced judges had the confidence to show up to a hearing and feel confident that they understood the issues and what the current law was on those points. Whereas Justice Steward liked to come very prepared, being a baby judge, as he called himself. So before the hearing starts, the parties will have filed some legal documents that help us to understand what the case is going to be about. So we would read those documents before going into court, and then try and think of understand what the legal issues were, and then go and do some research into the cases on those points. Because like you said, the judgment forms precedent, but also you want to make sure that you haven't missed any cases that are relevant on the topic, because otherwise, you'll have got the answer wrong.
And with that, I would imagine that obviously legal research is quite an important part of your role. Is there particular strategies, I guess, that people studying law at the moment now could be practicing with their assignments? And by that, I mean, how to research legal databases and stuff like that, that they can use even in clerkships to kind of, I guess, show their skills there, or moving into grad roles or work down the track?
Yeah, legal research has been a big part of all the different jobs that I've had in the legal industry. And I think it's very useful to be across all the different databases that you have access to as a uni student. You probably have access to more databases as a uni student than you will in a lot of jobs. But I think that different databases are good for different tasks and for different reasons. And also some people that you work for will prefer certain databases over other ones. So I think it's good if you use all the different databases rather than just having your favorite one. Because as well, sometimes you might find a case on one database that you couldn't find on another one. They do have different subscriptions and things like that. So I think it's good to be across all the databases. And then I also found it useful to just make a note of how I was going with my research as I was going. So even if you don't find something useful, you should make a note of the searches that you've done, so that you can tell people, oh, I've done this search and I didn't find anything, or I've looked at this and looked at that, and you can keep track of where you've looked so that you don't end up going back to the same places.
I think that's fantastic advice, and I think it's very true that what you say in terms of noting what you've looked at and where you've looked, because I've definitely had the experience of work before where someone's asked you to go and find something, and you might spend 3 hours looking and find absolutely nothing. And you're thinking, oh, well, I've just spent 3 hours of my time. I haven't found anything. But it's like, well, I haven't found anything, but these are all the places I have looked. So it also goes to just like justifying what you've been doing.
Yeah, definitely. And that does happen a lot. Oftentimes you don't know if there's going to be an answer to the question that you're looking into, and being able to then at least have some confidence that there might not be something on that topic. You'll be able to be more confident if you've recorded everywhere that you've looked.
I just want to take 2 minutes to talk like directly to a first or second year law student now, because I wish someone had kind of sat me down and told me this then, particularly when you're getting ready for assignments and things like that. If you're sitting there trying to write, an essay on a particular topic, go into all of the databases and dedicate a day to learning how these work, because there's stuff called commentary and explanations on why judges have made certain decisions or why legislation's been written in a certain way. And if your task is literally to, discuss, insert the topic and find different reasons for and against that, if you can spend a day in a database and finding all of this commentary and all of this, discussion around those points that really smart people have been talking about for years, it's all there, and you can kind of write your own essays that way instead of kind of sifting through large textbooks and trying to find the right answer. That's something I really didn't learn, and it's a bit embarrassing to say, until probably 4th or 5th year of uni, that commentary existed. So that would be my one tip of advice there.
Yeah, definitely. And you don't have to start there. I still usually start with a Google search, just so that I understand the topic. I mean, as we all know, law is just such a huge, there's so many different laws out there, and no one expects you to know everything about all of them. So I usually like to start with a Google search so I can understand the jargon and get a basic understanding of what the topic is. And from there, I'll then move into the legal databases.
Just to jump back a few steps, Georgia, you studied a Bachelor of Arts and Bachelor of Law at Deakin. What drove you to study law and arts, and was law always something that was on your radar?
No, it wasn't always on my radar. I think the reason I studied arts law was because, in school, it's just so hard to understand what's involved in different jobs, and what different jobs are even out there. So I wanted to keep it broad, which is where the arts comes in as well. And so I wanted to do something broad, but then I also wanted to do a degree that had some practical use, and some practical skills, and something that you could apply to real jobs. And that was where the law came in. And I always thought you don't need to end up being a lawyer if you've got a law degree. It can also be a useful degree to have in different commercial jobs, or outside the commercial sphere as well. But then I just ended up really enjoying the legal side of my uni degrees. So that's why I ended up in law.
And what was it particularly that you really enjoyed about studying law and learning a little bit more about the industry?
Yeah, so I guess I probably assumed that I would have preferred the art side, but then once I got into it, I think I liked the problem-solving side of law, and I liked the structure to it, and I liked that you could learn something and then apply it to a problem, and it had this practical application. Some of the art subjects I did, everything seemed a bit theoretical, and I liked being able to learn the different steps of how something worked, and then learn how to apply that to different sets of facts and circumstances.
Yeah, I think I feel the same way about law, and it's something that I really like about it. And I would really urge anyone that is kind of enjoying the areas of, say, debate or problem solving where there's not really a clear answer at school to consider going into law, because everything that we write, and George, you obviously had the similar experience. If you're giving an email of advice, it's like, we consider this to be the answer. It's not, this is black and white, the answer. So it's really taking everything at your disposal and really applying as you say, problem solving skills that you've kind of built up to say, hey, this is my argument as to why I think that this is correct. You can kind of take that or leave it, but no, I think it's a really fun place to be in. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on that. But jump forward a little bit, Georgia. So you're back at JWS now. You've kind of completed your grad program, and now you get the really cool opportunity to go on a secondment for one, but to Carlton United Breweries, or CUB, which is one of the probably bigger organisations in Australia. Do you want to walk through probably what a secondment is and how those opportunities arise, and then the massive transaction that you were working on while you were there?
Yeah. Carlton United Breweries was a really fun place to work. So they're a client of my firm, and I'd been working on a corporate matter for them. It was actually a transaction that didn't end up happening. But through that, I had got to meet the client and got to know the client. So then they ended up being purchased by Asahi. And so once they had entered into the sale and purchase agreement, they realized that they were going to have a lot of work to do in getting that deal to completion. So they wanted an extra resource. So when a company wants an extra resource within the company, but they don't want to hire a new person, they'll often get a secondee in for a short period of time to help with the extra work. So that's what happened in this case. Carlton United Breweries asked JWS if they had someone that could help out with this project. And so because I had worked for that client, I did the secondment. So it was 3 days a week, and I was working in their offices 3 days a week. So essentially it was like being an employee, being part of their legal team 3 days a week, while still being employed by my law firm.
And who are you working with out there?
So I was working with the legal team. So I was working for the GC. She was awesome, is awesome. And then they have quite a small legal team. So I got to sit with them and work with all of them, and then they'll often use all different law firms to help them with their different legal issues. Yeah.
So secondments are a really good way for law firms, and I assume other professional services firms, to get someone kind of in the inner workings of their client and really understand them well, and I guess come back and then develop that relationship even further. Do you want to talk to the skills that you kind of need to, obviously the legal skills, but be aware of what's going on and take in the really important information that you can kind of bring back to your firm and then use that to serve the client even better moving forward?
Yeah, definitely. I think the secondment helped me to be a lot more commercial. The commercial in-house lawyers have just different motivations than lawyers at a law firm. They've got different pressures on them, so they'll have often less time and money pressures, and they don't have the time to go into all the detail that you'll do at a law firm. So I just learnt to understand the level of detail that was required in each task, not to overdo it, and to work out the communication style that that the people that I were working for preferred. And so I think the work product and my style of communication with that client changed a lot over the course of 10 months as I learnt to understand the ways that I could help them, because they're so busy, the in-house lawyers there, and just working out the ways where I can make their day a little bit easier. I think, definitely taught me a lot about being more commercial.
Did you find that it was less technical out there?
Yeah, definitely less technical, more meetings, lots of emails, lots of like shorter emails, and just getting things done quickly and making sure that everything kept moving and liaising between the different stakeholders. So liaising between the internal stakeholders and the external law firms that were helping with tasks, keeping lists of making sure that everything was on track and following up with people. So it was a lot more of that, a lot more of like negotiating with the different parties and making sure that everything stayed on track rather than like going away to work on one big task.
And how has that experience helped you since you've been back in the office more now at JWS?
I think just, just learning people's different communication skills, but also understanding what the client wants, what's going to be useful to them, what work product they're going to be able to take and apply to different things, when they want a short answer and when they want us to go into detail, and just being able to not waste too much time on going and on writing a 10-page memo when all they really need is a short email.
Looking back over your journey, Georgia, what advice would you give yourself that you might not have listened to when you were younger?
I think when I was younger, I found legal workplaces to be quite intimidating. And I did all this work experience in uni, but at the start it was very much dragging my feet to go in there and get into the legal industry because it all felt a bit serious and dull and a bit intimidating. And I didn't like making mistakes. But I think the advice I would give myself is to just jump in and have a go, because they don't expect you to know everything. They definitely don't expect you to know everything about the law. They expect you to make mistakes. And anyone who's rational and reasonable will be understanding. That not all your bosses will be nice, but there will be ones that are nice and that you'll find out there. So I think my advice would be just to give it a go. Learn from your mistakes. Don't stress about making mistakes. All you need to do when you make a mistake is just front up to it straight away. And I remember the first times I made big mistakes in law firms and I was like, really don't want to go into my boss's office right now and tell him what I've done. But it always went so much better than I expected because they were always just happy that I'd fronted up to it and then we could work out a solution together. And I don't think that they were surprised because I think, it must happen all the time. And it was always a big relief after I'd been in there and got it off my chest. So I think it's just about giving it a shot and being able to learn from your mistakes and not being too intimidated by the workplace because they're just people too.
I think that's a really important point that they're just people too. And that goes to, I think, when you're reaching out to anyone for, to get a coffee, to hear about the industry or whatever it is, everyone's just a person. So they're probably going to be nice to you. On that point, Georgia, what would you have to say to, and particularly in kind of the COVID environment that we find ourselves in now, what would you say to, say, younger law students or people that are thinking of studying law, of how, maybe some practical tips of how to reach out to people to find out a bit about the industry and figure out, I want to get into corporate law or tax law or employment law or whatever it might be?
Yeah, I think people are generally willing to talk to students. I think once they always appreciate someone taking the initiative. Well, they usually appreciate someone taking the initiative to reach out. So it can be really hard if you just don't know where to start because you don't know anyone in the industry. And I didn't know many people in the industry, but I think a great starting point can be seeing what organisations and associations are out there because they'll often have student offerings for student memberships as well. So I'm involved in the Victorian Women Lawyers, but that's just one of many, many organisations and associations out there that facilitate networking between lawyers and students. So if you don't have any friends or family in the industry, a good place to start is just a Google search of all the different organisations that are out there and what they offer to students, and then attending different networking events that they're hosting online and seminars and things like that. To get to know some people, and then you might be able to find a mentor through that system, or you might just be able to find people that might have contacts who you can reach out to for a chat, because generally people are willing to chat.
I think that's fantastic advice. People are, and from my experience, people are always happy to chat, provided you approach them in the right way and you do it respectfully. Mm-hmm. And they might not respond to you straight away, but that when they do get back to you, quite often they're happy to give you the time of day.
Yeah, exactly. If you can be respectful of their time and do it when it suits them and things like that, then they'll really appreciate it.
Thanks for that advice, Georgia, and thanks for coming on the show. It's been great to learn about what you do as a lawyer at Johnson Winter Winter and Slattery, and the types of things you were doing as an associate to Justice Steward at the Federal Court of Australia.
Thanks for having me.